Welcome to the virtual class of learning. Hope you all welcome to the virtual classes of learning. Hope you all have been revising the concept. So I am here with a new concept, that is empirical formula. Today we will learn about empirical formula. What do you mean by the empirical formula? It is differ from the molecular formula. How it is differ from the molecular formula? First of all, what is the definition of the empirical formula? Empirical formula is a formula which gives the simplest whole number ratio of elements of various atoms present in a compound. What is the empirical formula? It is the simplest formula or the simple form of the formula which gives the simplest whole number ratio of the elements of the various atoms present in a compound. For example, the molecular formula of the hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. Here, two atoms are present, two kinds of atoms, that are hydrogen and oxygen, and two elements of hydrogen and two elements of oxygen are present. If we want to find the simplest ratio, then the simplest ratio of hydrogen and oxygen in this compound is 1:1, or the simplest ratio of hydrogen and oxygen is 1:1, so its formula become HO. This is the empirical formula of hydrogen peroxide. Similarly, the molecular formula of the glucose is C6H12O6. If we want to find its simplest ratio, then divide the whole compound or the number of the compound by 6, because the ratio of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen are 6:12:6. So the simplest ratio is 1:2:1. So the empirical formula of the glucose is CH2O. This is the simplest formula of the glucose, or this simplest formula is known as the empirical formula. Hence, we define the empirical formula is the formula which gives the simplest whole number ratio of the elements present in a compound. See here, in hydrogen peroxide there are two atoms of hydrogen and two atoms of oxygen. Therefore, the simplest ratio of its atoms are 1:1. So its empirical formula is HO. Similarly, the empirical formula of glucose is CH2O, as the molecular formula is C6H12 O6. Now, what is the molecular formula? The molecular formula is the formula which gives the actual ratio of the elements of the various atoms present in the molecule. As this is the molecular formula, it gives the actual ratio of the elements. Here the actual ratio of the elements are 6:12:6, carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. The actual ratio of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen in glucose is 6:12:6. It means it represents the molecular formula or molecular ratio of the different elements. This is all about the empirical formula and molecular formula. Next is relationship between the molecular formula and empirical formula. What is the relationship between molecular formula and empirical formula? Let us take one example, that is example of glucose. The molecular formula of glucose is C6H12O6 and its molecular mass is 12 into 6 plus 12 into 1 plus 16 into 6. It comes out to be 12 6 are 72 plus 12 plus 16. It comes out to be 180. This is the molecular mass of the glucose. Next, empirical formula of glucose. The empirical formula of glucose is the simplest formula of the element, that is CH2O. Now, the mass of empirical formula of glucose 12 plus 2 plus 16 comes out to be 14 plus 16, that is 30U. This is the molecular formula of glucose C6H12O6. Then we have to calculate its molecular mass. It comes out to be 180. Next, empirical formula of glucose CH2O. Its mass 30U. And we have to find the relationship between these two. If we divide the molecular mass by empirical mass, then it comes out to be the whole number ratio. We divide molecular mass by empirical mass of the compound, then it comes out to be always the whole number, where n is the whole number. The molecular mass of the glucose is 180. Empirical mass is 30. When we divide these two masses, it comes out to be 6. Here n is the simplest ratio. N is 6. Means in the formula of the glucose, 6 is the common factor which we have to divide to get the empirical formula of the compound. As the value of n is 6, here 6 is that factor which we have to divide the molecular formula to get the empirical empirical formula. If we divide this formula by the 6, we get the empirical formula of the compound, that is CH2O. Or simply we can write, if one formula and the value of N is given to you, then you have to easily calculate the other formula. Here, from this equation, we can say that the molecular formula of the compound is always equal to N into empirical formula, or the molecular formula mass or divided by empirical formula mass is always equal to N, where N is the whole number or the common ratio present in the compound. This is all about the empirical formula and the relationship between the molecular formula and empirical formula. I hope you understood this concept of the empirical formula. Thank you.